now we will have the panel on lessons from COVID to accelerate decarbonization in Hong Kong. We are happy to have Lawrence Yu, the Program Manager at Civic Exchange, to host the panel. Let's welcome Lawrence and the speakers.
Yeah, you can see. Yeah, please. And then Vincent. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to invest your time with us today. I'm Lawrence from Civic Exchange, and then today I'm really appreciate that I have a distinguished guest from Arup. Vincent is from Arup, and then Eric is from the GIFT, and then Agnes from the Yaozhi. And then today we have a panel on the lesson from the COVID to accelerate decarbonizing in Hong Kong, where we will talking about the Hong Kong stakeholder take COVID recovery as an opportunity to accelerate the investment needed to meet President Xi's carbon neutrality vision. The COVID-19 pandemic is not a surprise in its impact, but only in its timing. We have been long wondered by health experts that such a pandemic would one day disrupt our normal life. Similarly, we have long been wondered by the climate scientists that climate change will impact our normal life, and then we definitely need to develop a lower carbon economy. Now, as we looking forward to the end of the pandemic, let us fundamentally rethink our economic model so it becomes fit for low carbon emission world to avoid a tragic climate crisis. Before we dive into the panel discussion, I would like take the temperature of the room. So please show your hand if you think that and consider carbon neutrality itself is a goal strategy. Anyone think the carbon neutrality itself is a goal strategy? Please raise your hand if you agree. Yeah, that's awesome, thank you. Like the early time of this year, the private sector responded really rapidly to the COVID, like work from home policy and arranged a lot of virtual conferences. The private sector clearly has a critical role to play in financing climate transition projects and shifting the social norm toward net zero society. Increased investment and collaboration among government, research body, and industry participation will be the key to achieve this. So our goal today is whatever your role in different industries, that you will come away with something new idea, fresh perspective, and a new strategy that we can learn from COVID. So let me pass my time to my guests to introduce themselves first. So please, Vincent.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vincent Cheng. I'm a Director of Sustainability in Arup. Arup is a global engineering consultancy, in effective every part of the world. So these years that we see sustainability is our core kind of issues for our operations. So we actually commit by 2030 that our operation will be fully net zero. So I think that it's good today that we can share with you some of our insights and ideas that we learned not only from ourselves but also from our clients.
Hi there, everyone. It's nice to be with you in person, even if we can't see your smiling faces. My name is Eric Stryson. I'm the Managing Director at the Global Institute for Tomorrow. We're an independent think tank, born and bred here in Hong Kong with an ASEAN office in Kuala Lumpur. We work on a whole range of issues related to the socioeconomic development and shifting geopolitics and how business leaders can look at new opportunities around the region. Since 2006, We have facilitated nearly 100 field projects in about 15 different countries with some of the leading companies in the world, from HSBC to BASF, the German chemical company, through to the Dubai government, the Malaysian government, and many others. We have also, since 2015, worked quite a lot with the Hong Kong government. So while I don't claim to know everything, I think I have some sense of how the Hong Kong government works and also how kind of Hong Kong society works. I've been here for 15 years. I think you just want introductions, or do you want us to share something about the topic?
Introduction is good enough.
Just an introduction?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll leave it there. I'm looking forward to having a good discussion about what we can learn from COVID. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Lawrence. Good afternoon, and thank you to Rethink and Chris for having me here. It's really a privilege to be sharing a time with you. I know that a lot of you and most of you are really passionate about decarbonization, climate change, how to make the world better. So my background is, my name's Agnes Ng, and I work for now Yaozhi Asset Management International, which I joined only a couple of months ago. On the back of that, I'm still with a family office. And so we started looking at sustainable investing, clean tech and all that in 2010 in direct projects. But then lately with Yaozhi, we are aspiring to provide a differentiated climate and ESG fund sometime next year to professional investors. So Yaozhi is a fully owned subsidiary of a Shanghai company, which has very long, I wouldn't say very, very long, but enough history since 2011 in managing fixed assets in China. So in this session, I hope that I'll bring 40 years of experience in the financial markets, which in the last 10, very much focusing on sustainable investing. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. So here is the format today. So we will take a few moments for each panelist and then ask questions to draw the outline and the high-level ideas. And then the second half of our time today, we will open up the floor and then give you a chance to ask our distinguished panelists questions. So sounds good. So maybe I ask the first question to all panelists about the COVID crisis has changed our lifestyle very dramatically. There is a recognition that we are living through a historic moment, in particular wear masks in the public space and then keeping social distancing regulation. However, at the early of this year, Civic Exchange announced a popular opinion survey. Only 16% of people thought that the climate change today is more important than other livelihood issues like the economic turndown or housing or the health challenge. So my question is, what can we learn from the COVID in terms of to mobilize our citizens to engage in climate action? And then how can Hong Kong make a more effective transition?
Okay, I'd just briefly share my view on this. I think the world, not everyone, but I think majority of people still not see climate as the most important issues, first of all, and not only related to their life, but also their business. So I think what we need, based on learning on this COVID, so we need to make everybody know that this is a crisis. This crisis is true, right? It's not something faked by the scientists. That we have to face it, and we need to deal with it now. You know, it's a kind of a debt, right? If you have debts, I call it environmental debts or I would say carbon debts. If you have debts, the first thing you would like to do is actually to repay it, right? So there's no, I mean, it's kind of thinking that's been established among the general public. So I think we have to, through different channels, different means, to convey this idea, this message to everyone, so they can get kind of momentum to move on. And then with kind of effective engagement, I would say support from public, it's very, very difficult for government or everyone to follow through on that.
So Eric, I know you have some view on like how to engage the populace. So you might share your view.
Sure. I mean, I think that in the context of what we're speaking about, lessons from COVID to accelerate decarbonization. I mean, let me preface, I'm not a technical expert in any way on climate and change and carbon, but I think I understand the basics. And I think, Lawrence, you and I had a discussion about, the analysis that you've done around the main sources of carbon emissions here in Hong Kong, from the energy to the transport to the waste, et cetera. And we're going to go into, the buildings and some of the strategies for that. But I think the main point, in my view, is that when the COVID pandemic started in the early part of this year, Hong Kong people felt that it was a life and death issue. That is, even before the government put any measures in place, people got their masks, they took measures to isolate themselves, they practiced hand hygiene. It was literally a fear that if I catch this thing, because of our memory of SARS, I might die, I might pass it on to my family, they might die. And there was a fear of death within people in Hong Kong, which spurred a great outpouring of social solidarity, behavior change, and actually collective well-being and welfare. Much more so than in other countries around the world, like where I come from in the United States, where there was, in fact, the opposite of any appreciation for collective welfare. There was a more extreme form of selfish individual behavior and bickering amongst communities and states, et cetera. Now, I think the main lesson from that is, of course, Hong Kong has been arguably the best in the world when it comes to managing the pandemic. In the most densely populated place, we've never had a full lockdown. We've essentially overcome this virus at great pain to our normal lifestyles, our economy, the way that we think we should be living. So I think the main lesson that we should take is that here in Hong Kong, we don't see climate change or decarbonization as any important issue at all. Normal people on the street, you and me, we're not really serious about decarbonization. Hong Kong government has not prioritized in any way, really, decarbonization. So in contrast to the COVID pandemic, we really don't care yet about decarbonization. That is, I think, the first lesson. All you have to do is look at what's happening. 2 days ago, I saw that Hong Kong Express is launching a fly to nowhere scheme for entertainment. So I know that the airline emissions is not part of your sort of calculus when you look at the indigenous production of carbon. But yet, Hong Kong, as a world-class aviation hub for both passenger traffic and cargo traffic, we cannot escape the fact that there is a fundamental conflict of interest with the airline industry when it comes to decarbonization. And yet, we are joyriding on the climate change looming catastrophe. So what's that about? Why do we allow Hong Kong Express to fly people around at this time, okay? So I think, we can kind of go into some of the more points, but I think if we thought that the COVID lifestyle change has been draconian, meaning we can't eat out at dinner, we can't have gatherings of more than 4 people, right? We have to work from home, part-time, et cetera. If we really want to decarbonize, I think the lifestyle change and the regulations from government will be much more draconian if we really want to reach those targets. And I think too often we talk about this issue as if some technology is going to come magically reduce carbon and we can continue consuming as much as we always do. Energy, we can continue to drive as much as we want, et cetera. Well, I don't think that's realistic. So that's what I would kind of put out there.
Yeah, obviously lifestyle is really important. And then I know that Agnes, you always work with the asset owner and the regulator. So do you have any view like how can we make your asset owner or the regulator can like support the type to green?
Right, thank you. So COVID has shown us that a health crisis can have prolonged and profound impact on the economy and the financial health of companies. Some of them may not even be viable. A lot of them would probably have to think about new business models. So for us asset owners and asset managers, we are constantly thinking whether the assets in our portfolios are going to be stranded, what are the values going forward. We know that as Eric and as Vincent mentioned, people in Hong Kong, and as your survey result shows, people in Hong Kong particularly don't really think that climate change is an urgent issue. But then we know that climate change can manifest into physical risks, events that are very severe. You have seen California wildfires, in Australia as well, floods, landslides, severe weather, but those are physical risks, acute or chronic. The longer term, when we look at our portfolios, especially when pension funds look at portfolios, in the longer term, 7, 15, 20 years down the track, transition risk is going to erode the values of the assets in your books, erode the company values as well. So we look at that from that angle, and then we say, so what are we going to do about it? How are we going to help this and help companies mitigate or adapt to climate risks? Now, please understand that I'm from the GARP Association, which is the Global Association of Risk Professionals. So tonight we're going to have another session for GARP about climate risk. So we think about risks as different from other people think about risk. So when we think about climate change, it is more like an uncertainty. But companies and banks, financial institutions will have to attach probabilities to it and calculate what sort of impact and things like that. So I think in a nutshell, Lawrence, we can channel funds and capital to support business activities that will have positive environmental impact. And there are a lot of ways that we can do that.
Thank you so much. So Vincent, I have a question because like what Agnes mentioned that the assets, but the assets is not only the infrastructure or the building itself. The human resources also is a really important asset for a corporate. So after COVID-19, the first question for fully returning to the office is whether the worker is safe or not. So how can better indoor air quality can prevent diseases such as COVID-19? And then how to balance the energy consumption and more ventilation?
Okay, well, indeed, ventilation become the focus of how we can handle this COVID things. I think there's many studies worldwide. They're proven kind of facts. Is that it's airborne, first of all, and meaning that it's possible transmits through the air conditioning system. So these days, the industry, we work hard on identifying solutions, how we can deal with using current technologies, and we found that based on study from Hong Kong U, Hong Kong, that if you can provide enough sufficient fresh air, that itself it's effective to dilute the airborne kind of virus. So if we can provide extreme cases that we call air change, 4 air change per hours, that will be more than sufficient, to prevent effectively these kind of spreading within enclosed areas. Unfortunately, most of our current kind of AC system cannot handle that kind of fresh air amount. So the best we could have, for example, those that will provide the kind of excellent grade of indoor air quality will achieve something between 2, at most 3 air changes. So the next measure we should take is to provide the kind of filtration system. So that's another line of defense for our AC system. It can be handled using hospital-grade kind of fusion system, use Merck 16 kind of grade of system. That also, by itself, sufficient to prevent the spreading of that disease through the air conditioning system. And the third measures, I think, is also important. I mean, we know that the transmission of the COVID is not only, from the airborne, but also from the contact, so basically. So nowadays, I mean, a lot of facility adopting the measures we call contactless, be it on the way you hit on buttons of your escalators or others. So that's, I mean, these measures, I think, by and large, actually help a lot to reduce the kind of risks that, I mean, office goer will be exposed to this kind of COVIDs. But I agree with you that, I mean, that there's a dilemma here that, on one hand, we like to safeguard the health and well-being of staff by providing more fresh air. But we know that fresh air here that we need to treat to take away the water moistures, which will use a lot of energies. So again, that we have to rely on two things. First is on the way how we operate the buildings. Right? That these days we have a lot of what we call IoT sensor, which can detect effectively the space kind of air qualities effectively instantly. So we can use this kind of what we call demand control that can help optimize the amount of fresh air that can get into the space. I think more importantly that health is still the kind of number one issues that we have to safeguard. So I mean, during the kind of emergency stage, we have to, if possible, use full fresh air mode, rather in what we call post-COVID or more normal kind of operations that we can turn on, switch on to this kind of demand control kind of operations.
Sounds great. And then I think the climate change and the COVID, we share some similarity, is the current technology maybe not really able to handle the issue. So retrofitting is necessary. So Eric, I have one question would like to ask you more from the policy side action. Because now seems the retrofitting process is not very good, but we can see that actually the corporate response to COVID-19 is a really quite good. And then you also can see the government and society can shift really quickly. So can our government to do something really similar on the climate change issue? And then what practice can boost the collective behavior that we are lacking at this moment?
Okay, I think your question is about what the government can do to sort of accelerate this move.
Yes.
And I think Vincent talked about buildings, and obviously it's a balance of good indoor air quality, but energy efficiency and kind of retrofitting buildings to meet higher energy efficiency standards. I think there's plenty of things that the Hong Kong government could do, and I think many of these buildings, if I understand, are owned by SMEs or even individuals, family offices, etc. The Hong Kong government could mandate that they improve energy efficiency, and that's part of their obligation under certain terms of their ownership, and phase that in. But I think we should remember that whether you're talking about commercial policies or policies around public behavior and individual behavior, I think it's been 2 or 3 years even since the most recent bill at LegCo for the mandatory charging of solid waste. And that was shelved again back in June. And I think they've essentially given up on trying to get that through because LegCo is too concerned with what they perceive as the negative response from the public. So they give up. If we can't even charge people to manage our waste, how do we expect to accomplish even greater objectives of decarbonization? I think these are conversations that we have to have about how the legislative process is broken and what Hong Kong wants to do about that. Because frankly speaking, leaving it to individual behavior It's completely irrational to expect us to do things without having either strong incentives, financial incentives, or strict rules on what we can and can't do. Now, if you live in Shanghai, my understanding, it's been a while since I've been in Shanghai. I think like all of us, we don't travel as much as we used to, but I think there is a very clear separation of waste. And if you don't do it, I think there's even some technology on the bin that knows who you are, knows what time you broke the rule, and gives you a little black mark on your personal sort of register. And of course, we all love to bash the heavy hand of the rules regime in Beijing, but if you want outcomes, you have to actually give people the motivation to do that. Meanwhile, when the pandemic and the kind of lockdowns and restrictions came, all we did was go and buy, multiples more of Deliveroo in huge plastic bags and packaging, and we actually went in the opposite direction. So why was it okay for us just to consume unbridled delivery food so that we could feel convenienced and just be pleased to continue our lifestyle? I think the main message is if you want to decarbonize, lifestyles will have to change, and government, the function of government is to set policies to steer behavior to achieve the outcomes we want, but we don't seem to be able to do that at present.
Mm-hmm. So Agnes, about the policy, so do you feel that finance sector is sufficient engaged with the government, or do you see any opportunity to more proactive in driving the decarbonization? And then I also have another question, because Eric also mentioned that the SME is also really important. So how can the SME or the corporate can access the funding from like the government or other capital?
Oh, we're going to be sitting here all day talking about that. But to keep it to the point, I agree with Eric that there are so many buildings that are owned by individuals or SMEs or families. In Hong Kong, there are over 30,000 buildings that are already older than 50 years old, older than a lot of you in the room here. And so retrofitting, as in 2013, International Energy Agency said retrofitting is actually the hidden fuel. That's how they coin it. But in Hong Kong, without policy intervention, it's going to be a little bit difficult for everybody's interest to be aligned. So I was thinking that perhaps the government could start with, when they do urban development, and this is part of the work that perhaps Arup can, your expertise will be very valuable, that whether or not when we build infrastructure into a new piece of land where you're going to be building new residential buildings, whether that the government can demand or require that the materials are low carbon embodied, equipments are low emissions, the buildings meet certain beam or lead minimum standard. Currently they're not, right, Lawrence? Currently none of the Hong Kong buildings are required.
Yeah, not mandatory.
Not mandatory. So can you make it mandatory? And Arup can design natural ventilation, energy efficiency, water and waste management, all that a holistic approach when you do urban development. I think that's the one thing that governments can do. But for investors, for banks, can banks give green mortgages? Younger people are going to be looking for buildings that are green for their well-being living. Can banks give that sort of mortgages, and can insurance companies lower the premiums on home insurances that if the homes are green? So there are so many things that we can do. But in terms of the perspective of asset owners and asset managers, for SMEs, I think your second question was for SMEs and less resourced companies. There are two angles to it. One is that we must try to help them because they're less resourced, but how are we going to try to help them? I think banks can support them with sustainability-linked loans. So if they meet certain targets in their environment or the social or governance KPIs, then interest rates can be lowered. For us investors, we have to look at SMEs that they're going through a spectrum of green. Like Mark Carney, the former governor of Bank of England, is describing this as 50 shades of green. So when companies are going from brown to green or moving up the spectrum of green, we as investors must not just say we divest on the brown ones or on the less green ones. Why don't we try to help them and engage them, help them to go through this process? Because if we don't give them the funding, how are they going to be able to turn green or greener? Their path of decarbonization will face much more barriers. So engagement and education, working together, I think collectively we can do the good things.
So, Vincent, do you have anything you want to tap on? Yeah, like how to support the SME, no matter from the capital side or the knowledge side, because most of the SME owner, maybe without any professional training, they have no idea what is sustainability or the climate change. So how can we mobilize them to retrofit their building, and what institutional change is needed?
Okay, we have to look into the problem first. What exactly is the problem? Why we could not have all the building to do the retrofit next day, tomorrow? I think that primarily first is that availabilities of technologies, which is know-how we just mentioned. I think it's, I agree with Agnes, it's not that critical things. And you can ask, you can get a lot of supports from professional bodies, like Green Building Council. They're actually more than happy to provide the kind of supports to help the SME to equip themselves to do some of the works. For example, retrofit commissioning is one of the key areas that we like to promote also. The other thing is availability of the funding. When we say funding, we should think along the scale of this particular funding. Right? For a typical building like this one, this office, if, for example, in 50 years' time, when we become retire, I mean, the kind of order of magnitudes of retrofit is talking about a few millions at most, or less than, sometimes less than 1 million. So we're talking about that sort of order. If you just get to any big financial institutions, they won't actually provide this kind of loan at all, because it's simply too small for them. So I think at the moment, at least I know, Agnes, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's no kind of mechanisms to allow this kind of we call it micro fund or micro loan that's accessible to the SME. In that, well, I mean, issues like we refurbish the wall. I mean, for old buildings, it's nowadays it cannot be handled. Using various mechanisms along the energy. So I think you can see the kind of a challenge from these two areas. And then we have another big issues that, I mean, the kind of volumes, the amount of buildings that are facing this is even more, problematic. Then I think for, I would say, those big developer, where they have a lot of the portfolio, they probably can handle that with their own kind of resources or internal kind of financing mechanism. But for those individual buildings, it's very, very difficult for them. And in particular, the ownerships of those buildings, the multi-ownership, that will create another layer of kind of, I would say, problem. So I would say these are multifaceted and to some extent multi-dimensional kind of things. We have to have policy to help. Otherwise, it's difficult for everyone, not only SME, but everyone to help to move things faster on that.
Thank you so much. And then So Eric, do you have anything you want to?
No, I would just add to that I don't think this is not a scale of a challenge that can be left purely to market mechanisms. I think the only way to address this situation is to provide serious incentives or regulations on the owners of buildings. I don't think the market is going to sort it out. And then, of course, clearly to be able to provide access to financing at favorable rates to do so is something that would be very constructive for the government to do. But it cannot be left to the market, because obviously, if it's too small, banks are not going to lend. So, you know, we should not be naive about this.
So can I summarize, like, we definitely need carrot and stick to help people to change their behavior? Oh, okay, so.
Yes, I think definitely.
So let me open the floor for question. Do you guys have any question would like to ask the panelists? Okay. So, any question? So we almost run out of time, so maybe a quick wrap up. Maybe all panelists, would you mind to share one final thought with all the guests and participants, no matter here physically or in the Zoom?
Well, I'd certainly like to see this as a, not crisis, but kind of opportunity for everyone. And firstly, that, I mean, you see that there's a change in the way how we see office, I mean, work and also consumption, and going to the shopping mall. I mean, these days you can effectively doing this virtually at your home. So that's actually provide kind of a change that help, hopefully, the move to our roadmap of decarbonizations quicker. The other things I think is equally important, and worldwide we are talking about green recovery. I mean, the governments everywhere, is going to spend billions or trillions of dollars of things that I think that provide a lot of opportunities for not only SME but everyone who are interested in this business to develop solutions, innovative solutions. Lastly, certainly, the technology certainly help also. So we are also in the stage of what we call digital transformations, and that actually itself help a lot, because nowadays we have a lot of data that can trace the production, the use of energy, and also the production of waste, and we can trace. We have at least a mechanism to manage the whole thing. So I think we should also writing on this kind of big or mega kind of transformation, so that it can actually become a useful tool for help to move along this global decarbonization roadmaps.
So Eric, I remember we have a conversation before. We are so excited about presidency decarbonization vision. So maybe would you mind share in the final one is like to share what is the opportunity you thought? Yeah.
Well, I think it's just, we're all eagerly anticipating to see what comes out of this next 5-year plan and how the decarbonization drive to 2060 will start to shake every industry in China. And I think the key question is, are we in Hong Kong going to be part of that? And are we going to keep up with that? Not to say even potentially lead that. I've sort of given up on the potential to lead that, but are we going to keep up? Or is it going to be led by Shenzhen, Shanghai, and others? I think the problem we have in Hong Kong is that actually, if you think about it, the effects of climate change are really not going to affect us that much. We're the lucky ones. The effects of climate change and of carbon are going to be felt in the hundreds of millions of people in India, in the Gangetic Plain, that are going to have to migrate because where they live will be too hot. It'll be affected in the Mekong Delta, where people will have to migrate because the sea will encroach upon the delta. We will be okay, I mean, some people's property value might go down if it's, in the wrong place or whatever. But because of that, we don't feel an urgency to do anything. And we're very comfortable in our lifestyles, and we're actually quite comfortable and okay with the government being dysfunctional and not able to pass any policies to actually decarbonize. So that therein is the problem, right? Yes, we need to, I think there's no getting away that we need to reduce our consumption of energy. There's no getting away that we need to actually drive less cars. We have the best public transportation in the world, and yet we still seem to love driving around at very cheap prices in carbon-emitting automobiles. And if I understand correctly, we have a landfill that is filled with 30 to 40% food waste. I mean, this is unbelievable. You talk about decarbonization, and we can't even find a way to get food out of our landfill. So sorry to be a little bit cynical, but I think this is a kind of the wake-up call. If everybody in this conference is so passionate about decarbonizing, well, we better find a way to kind of wake up and do it.
Thank you. Agnes?
Everyone in this room is passionate about sustainability. And a lot of us, like me, born and raised in Hong Kong, we like Hong Kong to be sustainable, have a good future for our next generations. But we always think that Hong Kong is such a fortunate land. We call it Phúc地, Phú Địa. We don't have floods or severe weather or anything like that, or wildfires or those things, but we will. Because if you look at the map that China Water Risk shared, in a couple of decades, the water level is going to be up to the lobby, the ground lobby of HSBC. I don't know how we're going to go to work with MTR. I don't know how we're going to, the storm surge, every 1 meter of water rise, storm surge could be 7 meters high by that sort of order. I'm not a scientist. I don't know the exact numbers, but the scientific data tells us that if we in Hong Kong, even though we are one single dot on the planet, if we don't do something now, collectively, decisively, urgently, forcefully, then Hong Kong is also going to be affected, and wildlife are going to be affected. By 2100, when my grandson is going to be 80 years old and hopefully still living, what kind of world will he and his generation and the future generations be facing? I'm very saddened to think about it. So for us, whatever things we can do as individuals, and as government, regulators, as engineers, as thought leaders, every one of us have to do what we can do within our core competence to help decarbonize this planet and help decarbonize Hong Kong. And thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Actually, I think COVID offers us a really good rehearsal to prepare our real challenge, climate change. So, and then we definitely need to create urgency and then craft a popular message to mobilize them to work to collectively and then to deal with this crisis and then face our planet. So this is the end of the panel. Thank you, everyone, and then thank you all the panelists.
Thank you, Lawrence, and our speakers. I'm sure we will all take away some very strong messages about how we need to take action in our own lives and maybe take some back to our businesses as well.